Okay, I'm back in my code editor and I'm located in lecture 36 folder, which is in full stack-course 5 examples folder. And the first thing we need to do is download the UI router JS file that I specified here that's supposed to be sitting in the lib directory. Well, it actually is already sitting in the lib directory because I downloaded it already, but let me show you how to do this. Now, the annoying part, funny Google, the annoying part about downloading UI router, if you just type in download UI router, is that all the links that will first come up, in fact, if you click on any of these links, will be all the wrong versions. And the version that's constantly coming up is 0.2.14. Well, that's the wrong version. That's not the latest or the latest version that is stable. The latest version that is stable is actually 0.3.1. So how do you get to it? Well, instead of clicking on all these official UI router links, what you should look for is a CDN, a content delivery network. So look for anything that says CDN in it. For example, here's the first one, says the best FOSS CDN for web-related so on. If you click on that, and you take a look, the version that is going to be sitting here, or at least one of the versions, is 0.3.1. If you choose that version, and then in this case, I could just have the min, so that it gives you a couple of URLs. One is for the full version. That's if you want to go and kind of read the code of the actual UI router. And the second one is the min, and the minified version, and that's the version we want. So we could go ahead and copy this URL, open up a new tab, paste it there, and this is the entire minified version of the UI router. Make sure that if you see the version, or make sure that you do see the version, and the version is saying 0.3.1. Now there's a newer version that is 1.0 that's using kind of more of an Angular 2 approach, even though it could still be used with Angular 1, but that one is still in beta or in alpha or beta at this point, and it keeps updating with breaking changes, so we don't want to go for the one that keeps breaking yet. It's not really stable released. So the way you would get this file is just once you load it in a browser, just right click it and click Save As. And once you do that, you could go to whatever folder that you're in that you need to place it in. In my case, it's lecture 36, the lib folder. I really already have it here, so I don't need to click Save again, but that's what you would do when you download it. So I'll click Cancel and go out of this again, and let's go back to our code editor. So this is a very simple app, and it's called Routing App. That's the name of my module. And the first thing we need to do is obviously reference the angular.ui.router.min.js, and we already did that right here. The second thing we need to do is place some sort of placeholder in our HTML where our views are going to be inserted into. In this case, it's UI view right here, and it's going to be inserted somewhere in the body here. And I can see here that I have a div here, a placeholder for something that has a class called tabs. And basically what we're going to do in this application is we're going to have two tabs. If you click on one tab, it will show you the contents of one tab, and if you click on another, it will show you the contents of another tab. Okay, so the next step is to go to our app.js. That's the one that declares our routing app, and actually declare a dependency of our app or of our module on another module called UI.router. Notice the dot, it's not a dash like the actual project name is. And we need to configure our UI router or the UI router services, and we're going to configure them in our config method with this function called routes config. The routes config is going to inject two things, the state provider and the URL router provider. As we discussed, the providers are the ones that are going to be configuring the state service and the URL router service. Okay, so far we really have absolutely no code in here. So if we save that and go back to our browser, we could close this tab, and I already have my browser sync running, and really it's doing nothing more than just displaying our h1 tag at this point. And take a look at the URL. The URL is just a regular, whatever it is, the host is /index.html. If we go back, and the first thing we'll do is go ahead and uncomment this. So URL router provider, the otherwise method is going to say /tab, meaning that if you don't recognize anything that is matching your states, and in this case we have no states, and they have no states that are associated with URLs, go ahead and try the /tab one. If we go ahead and save that, go back to our browser, you can see that it automatically forwarded us already to /tab1. If I remove that, delete it, and try it again, it automatically will jump right back to /tab1. So that's working. The next thing we need to do is to set up our states. And the way we do that, let's say set up UI states. And the way we're going to do that is using the $state provider. And it's going to have, we'll indent it, a state, and we'll start with the name. We'll call the name tab1. And then we're going to have a configuration object that's going to represent that state. And we're going to associate it with the URL /tab1. And another parameter we'll provide is template. And its template is going to be super simple. It's going to be just div, and this is tab1 content. And that's pretty much it. Let's put a semicolon right here. When we save that, go back to our browser, you can see that this is tab1 displayed because it automatically went to that state. Well, let's go back to the code editor and define one more state. And I'll give it a little bit of space called state. And this time we'll define tab2 state, again with a configuration of a URL of /tab2. And the template we're going to have is going to be another div, but this time it's going to say this is tab2 content. Let's save that. Let's go back to our browser. And now when we manually type in tab2, you'll see that the content switched to tab2 content. If we inspect that, we'll see that UI view contains this div that says this is tab2 content. And if we switch this back to tab1, you'll see that the UI view is now going to contain this div with a this is tab1 content. We can achieve the same thing by using the template URL property, and in this case specifying the URL to a tab1.html template, which already contains these words. So at this point we could just say source, because it's sitting in the source directory, tab1.html, and the second one will say source tab2.html. So if we save that, go back to our browser, we'll see that tab1.html is working, and if we put tab2.html, it's not working. Let's take a look as to why that's not working. Well, pretty simple. We forgot to say URL in the property. So it's treating it as the actual content of the template instead of the URL. So now that we saved that, let's go back to the browser. So now it's actually saying tab2. This is tab2 content. Now, the URL router comes with a very convenient directive that lets us create links and actions in order to go from one state to another. If we go back to our index.html, we could provide those type of links right here. We'll call an a tag, and instead of href, we'll say UISref. And UISref stands for UI router state reference. And we'll give it a state reference of, we need the state tab1. And this tab1 is matching directly with the name of the state tab1. So it's looking for the name of the state in this particular attribute value. And we'll go ahead and give it the name called tab1. And we'll do the same thing. We'll copy it. And we'll do the same thing for tab2 since we have a state called tab2. Go ahead and save that. Let's go back to our browser. And now you see we have a couple of links. So if we click on tab1, this is changing to tab1. Click on tab2, it's changing to tab2. If you take a look as to what actually that UISref directive did for us, we could take a look right here and see that what it's actually doing is it's creating the href for our anchor tag such that it's pointing to the right URL to invoke this type of behavior to changing from state to state. However, it does way more than that. We can go ahead and omit the actual URL that's associated with the state. For example, the tab2 URL can be commented out, and now our state is only referenced by its state name. But this will still work. Let's go back to our browser, and even though the tab1 is looking like a link and tab2 is not, well, the reason it's not, let's take a look, is because it doesn't have an href attribute anymore as part of it. And the reason it doesn't is because we removed the URL that is associated with the tab2 state name. However, it is still clickable just like anything else, and in fact, if I click it, you'll see it will still change to tab 2. And the reason it's clickable is because of this UISref directive that knows that when I click on this, I expect that my UI router should switch to the state with the name tab 2 that is specified in the UISref. Obviously, this looks a little bit ugly, so we could go back to the code editor, and instead of having a link right here, we could change it to, for example, a button. And a button is certainly something that is clickable, no matter what its href is, which is not even a valid attribute name for it. And we'll save it. I'm going to go back, and now you see I have a button. If I click the button now will invoke the state transition and will transition us to the state with the name tab 2. So you can see we're not bound to just the URL mapping. We can also have simple states. Notice that we're sitting at tab 2 state, but yet the URL is still saying tab 1. And the reason it's saying tab 1 is because that's the only URL that got recorded. So if we go ahead and press and refresh, you'll see that it's still going back to tab 1. But tab 2 really means absolutely nothing to it, because tab 2 is not mapped to anything, so therefore it's going into the otherwise method and then jumping back to tab 1. However, there's such a state called tab 2, so when I invoke it using my UISref directive, it will still switch our UI router to the state with the name tab 2, yet keep the URL exactly the same as before. Let's go back to the code editor, and actually we'll go ahead and comment this out, and we'll place the anchor back to where it was. We'll just change this to tab 2. And let's learn about one more UI router directive, and that one is called UISref active. And that directive lets us specify a class, a CSS class, that should be applied to this particular tag when that particular state is active. So I want the class to be active tab, and I'll do exactly the same thing for the second one. So this will get activated, or this active tab class will be attached to this A tag when our state is tab 2. And in this case, it will be attached to this A tag when our state is tab 1. Now, I already pre-made this class called active tab, and if you take a look at my CSS style, all this active tab doing is just bolding the text, making the text bold. So since we've defined our UISref active, we just have to change the label here, and we also have to go back to our app.js and actually re-enable our URL so we could see the URL changing as well, because we don't want to keep these two states without a URL. They both should have a URL, at least in our case. And now we could go back to our browser, and you could see that tab 1 is bolded, and the reason it's bolded is because we are at that state. If we click tab 2, tab 2 becomes bolded, and tab 1 is no longer bolded because the active state, or the active tab class, got removed from it. We could actually take a look at it right here, and we'll take a look right here, and you could see that class active tab got placed under the class attribute, got placed on the USRef tab 2. If we click tab 1, it will get placed on the USRef tab 1 because that is the active state at the moment. Okay, so let's summarize. UI Router uses independent concepts for URL mapping and UI state representation, and therefore you could really think of those two things as two subsystems that exist inside the UI Router package. Now, the way you configure UI Router in angular.config is first by providing an alternate URL mapping with the URL Router Provider service with the method otherwise providing some other URL. That's in case the URL is garbled or the user typed in the wrong URL. This rule will kick in and go ahead and forward the browser to the correct URL that actually does exist within your system. The second way is you configure states with optional URLs, but usually you do use them, but sometimes they're optional, using the state provider.state method. And you provide the name of the state and a configuration object that has a whole bunch of properties. Some of the ones that we've used so far is the URL property that maps the state to a particular URL, and a template URL which maps a particular URL of the actual template that contains some HTML to that particular state. So when the state is activated, the contents of that template are inserted inside of the UI view tag. and you use the UI view tag as a placeholder for your state-based user interface portions. Now you can also use a special directive called UISREF, which stands for UI state reference, as opposed to just an H hyperlink reference. And that is an attribute that you could place on an A tag or really any other tag, and it constructs links for you and actions to configured states. So such that you could, for example, place that on a button, and when you click on the button, whatever state that you specified in your UISREF attribute, that state will be activated when you click on the button or you click on a particular link. If you're specifying this attribute on an anchor tag, and your state actually defines a URL that's associated with it, the UISREF directive will create the href attribute on that tag for you, so when you click it, it will go ahead and update the browser address bar.